Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Ashley Limbers and I'm the Marketing Coordinator at Total Computer Solutions. Total Computer Solutions is a full service provider of IT support and services, including network security, cloud computing, network administration, and managed backup services in Central North Carolina. Today we are hosting Disaster Recovery, What's Your Backup Plan? Presented by Andy Purcell. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. I'll bring them up at the end of the presentation during our Q&A. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Andy. Our presenter today has been with TCS for 2 years and has over 20 years of IT and security consulting experience. Additionally, he has held certifications from VMware, Citrix, EMC, and is a Cisco Business Value Specialist. This valuable combination of experience and education helps Andy find TCS's clients the right solutions to grow their businesses.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate the glowing introduction and look forward to having a conversation today about disaster recovery and what your backup plans are. Just a reminder, we will do a giveaway at the end from all of our registrants for the presentation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get toward the latter part of the discussion. But again, as we do more and more work in the areas of security and we talk more and more about backups and DR, it is important to remember that there are people out there whose sole reason for their existence is to see, retrieve, steal, and use your data. And you have to look at that as a real opportunity to put in place a backup or a DR plan to first help prevent that from happening, and two, to mitigate the results of that or the tragedy of whatever you might lose. And obviously in the case of ransomware, you want to make sure that you can recover back to a point prior to the ransomware attack, but also fully in getting as much of your data back, and especially if you're in a transactional environment. So I want to go through the presentation. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A section at the top of the Zoom bar, and we can address those later, and I'll go over questions at the end, and obviously we can ask additional ones if they spawn questions from those answers. So just a quick overview of what we're going to discuss as we go through this presentation. We're talking about disaster interruptions, and that can come from a variety of reasons, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. What are the consequences of the downtime? What are the consequences to you internally as a business, to you as a business owner potentially, to you as an employee? What are those consequences for your customers? How do they reflect for your suppliers? And what benefit might they give a competitor or someone who's looking to benefit from you having some kind of an interruption? The next, a recovery policy. That's sort of a who, what, where, when, how kind of scenario. What do you want to recover? How far can you go back? What are your tolerances that you can withstand, if you want to think about it that way? And then what's your archive policy? How do you prevent things from being accessed by archiving them off? And then last, what hardware and software decisions do you make when you want to add in a new disaster recovery or a backup plan? As we start with that, we think about natural disasters or the obvious ones. We have our annual hurricane and tornado season around here. Certainly spring and summer brings with it thunderstorms. Floods can result from any of those, whether it's rain from a hurricane or rain simply from a thunderstorm. And also fire is always a danger we want to plan for and look out for. So those natural disasters are things we can't really control, but really can have an impact on our business and on our uptime. Another common reason that you would need to back up data is simply equipment failures, whether it be a hard drive or an entire server, whether it be a power outage that has resulted from one of the natural disasters, simply have an internet outage. Somebody's cut the line outside, cut the fiber to your building for one reason or another, or if some occurrence has happened at your provider where they've gone down. One of the strange things that can cause you to have downtime would be unexpected updates and patches to your system. So we certainly heard of Microsoft and Patch Tuesday and how they do a really maybe overly good job of keeping us all patched. But suppose they patch something on your system that you don't need, text to voice For example, the recognition might be something that you don't use in your environment, but it could in fact break something else. So how do you avoid that? And just to plan for, does that cause you an outage or some sort of inconvenience? And then the worst would be intentional acts. We mentioned ransomware earlier. That's today's most common type of attack. But yeah, an intentional hack with an exploit of some sort, a phishing attempt, whether it be to get money or whether it be a phishing attempt to cause some other sort of disruption. Yet viruses, obviously, right now we're on the lookout for those. Everybody should have an antivirus that's up to date. So that's a critical problem. Simple corruption. Your data goes bad for some reason. So you may have a bad sector on a drive or something, but the data becomes corrupted. And then worst of all really is a human act. So somebody comes in and sneaks into your building and causes something or steals some data. Maybe something where in the parking lot, they drop a bunch of flash drives. One of your employees picks one up and sticks it in a drive and it kicks off some sort of an exploit within the company. So those are some of the potential disruptions that we can have within a business. And just to give some examples, and when we talk about them in the theoretical sense, but in a practical sense, this was a tornado that came through customer virus Cafe Distributing here locally. And there's actually a bit of a funny story that goes along with the tragedy, in that their IT director was busy running in and out of this building that was falling down around him, grabbing servers and pulling them out. And as you can imagine, that led to them putting a more comprehensive backup and DR system in place. So thankfully he was not injured, but it was a tough lesson that they learned and benefited them in the future. You get a widespread hack. In Charlotte, we had a situation with Mecklenburg County a few years ago, and someone opened an email attachment. That kicked off some sort of malware and infected 48 of the county's servers. So the demand from the hacker, I guess ransomware type situation, was only $23,000, but was fairly modest. But just as a point of order or a rule that they had internally, the county did not pay the ransom. And the result of that, unfortunately, is they were not able to get back their data or recover it. It made them actually, as they went through the process of the remediation and some of the forensics, had to go to a paper accounting system as though we were running in the 1970s or something. And it affected other departments, as you can imagine. Everybody wanted a permit, whether it was for business, whether it was for an event, I guess marriage licenses, even if you want to think about it, even to that level. But everything within the county was affected. Might have been better for them to pay the $23,000, but certainly another hard-earned lesson about why you want to make sure that you have a good backup and a way to recovery in the case of a disaster. Equipment failure. We've all had it. Usually happens about 3 a.m. We have a picture of a snake coming out of a server here. We have certainly had customers who had a server room, if you want to call it that was maybe in a work area, maybe it was in a warehouse, and they had rats and other rodents eating the insulation off of wires. And so those are real case here we had at TCS. So just an aside, take care of your server room. But those things that cause equipment failure, and that equipment failure itself is going to lead to a need to retrieve and restore that data. Certainly if you have a fire internally that may or may not even affect your server room or your systems, if it does launch the sprinkler system, you could have the water damage just within that room, even if there was not a fire that threatened the entire building. So equipment failure is always there, and it's very real. And certainly we certainly don't wish that on anyone. Rockingham County Schools is another local company, or local entity, I guess. And same thing, they clicked on an attachment in Word, and all of their physical and virtual servers were affected. It took them a month to get it fixed, and the project just for the remediation was over $300,000. And then the technology cost to replace all that brought the total over $1 million. So I probably saw that recently here in the news. Some of you may have even had somebody that you know that was involved with it. So it does happen, usually at the absolute worst time, though you can never imagine there being a good time for it. And there are consequences. I mean, we all talk about it. We're all aware of what consequences can be, and we have all these nightmare scenarios in our head. But if we think about it, what does it do to communication? Does it affect your phone? How many of us are on VoIP phones today? So a hardware outage or some sort of a natural disaster absolutely can affect the way that we communicate via phone. Obviously, folks moving to Office 365 might help mitigate somewhat the inability to get to email, but those who are still running Exchange on site, and certainly in the past when everyone was, your ability to even send out a simple email to your customers or to your attorney or someone else to try to come and help with your disaster isn't affected. Same thing with the website. If it's hosted offsite, people don't necessarily know that you have a problem, but it is certainly possible that if you're storing that data on site and you're hosting it locally, that you can have an issue. And then how do we work? Who can go to work? What can you do? We think about the tornadoes that did come through, Stoneville a few years ago. Some came through High Point where I live. And are you able to get out and go to the office? Sort of the same issue that we're having now with work from home with the pandemic that's going on. What applications are affected? If you've got a database for your ERP system sitting on one of those servers, the server becomes unreachable for some reason. You're left with an inability to run your core software, your core applications. And it does, just like Mecklenburg County, have the potential to move us back to a paper system. We have a client here who is a chiropractor, and he had a ransomware attack prior to us taking over working with his network. And in that case, he lost, I would say, 3 months probably worth of data. His backup was decent, but not complete. And so he was reduced to working on a paper system to recreate those invoices in a very transactional environment where maybe 20 or 30 customers a day or patients a day, and had to go back and doing that the old way. And then your running of your business, your goods and services, whatever you're selling, whatever your product is, whatever your offering is, you're going to have difficulties reaching suppliers. You may have difficulties getting your orders out to your customers. Certainly, we talked earlier, communication could be a problem. It's an opportunity for a competitor, obviously, to come in and take advantage of that. We work with a company who makes cabinets, and during this pandemic, they've seen a real bump in their business because they were able to stay open, they were able to avoid infection, and a number of their competitors were not as fortunate. And so they reaped additional business from those competitors during this difficult time. So, one of the things we'll discuss toward the latter part of this is how do you get back up and running in a virtual environment? How do you make sure that in the cloud, not only is your data saved and protected, it can be restored, but how do you run virtually with VMs in the cloud? And it's sort of the IT version of having that temporary warehouse space physically at your destination or close to it. So those are just a few things that are critical when something occurs. If you look at it statistically, we all being in IT, we like numbers and we like data. If you don't have a backup strategy and you're not able to implement it, there's some things that have very definite impacts on your business. Fully a third of the companies do not test their backups. They put it in place, they're happy with it. They may sit for 2 or 3 years without ever being tested. Even amongst those who do test them, you're going to have over 3/4 of those where their backup fails or their restore fails. So it's not good enough just to create a backup plan and pat yourself on the back. You've got to test it. If you find a flaw in it, you've got to make sure you get that ironed out so that when the time comes that you do need it, it's there for you. 60% of organizations who lose their data for a week or 2 or more end up going out of business. So it can be very critical. If you go a couple of weeks without being able to take orders, to being able to ship, being able to bill, being able to receive payments, then you're putting your company in jeopardy. So hopefully that's a number, and hopefully there are ways they can get around that, and those companies can stay in business. But understand that there's a significant problem for companies who lose their data and can't get back up and running for a week or 2 or even more. Obviously, we all know of the hard drive recovery companies that are out there. There are 2 or 3 that are fairly well known. A lot of times the cost just for them to evaluate a drive to see about retrieving data could be $5,000 or even $7,500. My chiropractor was going to have to pay $5,000 for a company like this just to see if his data could be retrieved. And at the end of the day, there's no guarantee, but the $5,000 was just the starting point to check the viability of the drive going forward. So these are very, very real issues that can come up and that can be avoided by having a backup in place and having a restore process that you've practiced. If you look at policies and procedures, which is sort of what we want to talk about and how we want to be sure that we can put these in place so that you can avoid having that problem. We have to create a playbook. And just like a sports team, a football team has a playbook. They have a strategy. They have a methodology that they follow throughout a contest. We're talking here about the same sort of processes that we want to put in place and create a playbook. You may also want to call it a DR strategy is the other term that you hear used a lot. But the first part is, what do you want to back up? And we start at the very basics. You're going to have primary or critical data to your business. That's probably an accounting system, could be an ERP system. Those are obviously database driven in most cases, whether you're using SAP or whether you're using QuickBooks or any of the myriad of applications that run the gamut in between. But that's probably some of the most critical data you want to look at first. What would your business be unable to operate without? And obviously the backup is determined. You have to look at that data. Do you have to keep a database backed up? It determines whether you keep a flat file as opposed to keeping a full backup as we're discussing here. So those are the first two things to look at. Do you have archive data? This could be from some sort of governance or compliance situation. In the medical industry, HIPAA is going to govern what you need to keep, how long you need to keep it. And do you need to keep any of that? Do you have archive email that you've archived off for past years? Do you have sales order information, past customer information, all the stuff that is archived? Maybe it's in a storage environment. Does that need to be backed up? How are you addressing that? And it may be a different answer than your primary data, but you want to make sure that you're also going to get that archive data moved to the cloud as well. You have servers in-house. You have servers that may be in the cloud today, whether it's at Azure or through Google or Amazon or one of the others. Just because you're running out of the cloud doesn't take away the need to back up that data. So you have to ask yourself, I'm going to definitely want to back up my in-house servers. What am I going to do with my cloud servers? Is my cloud provider backing up sufficiently that I'm confident that I don't need a third party? And that's the discussion point is probably different for everybody. Look at your services just from Microsoft. Your AD, obviously we talked about Exchange somewhat moving with a lot of folks to Office 365. But either way, whether you have in-house Exchange, it absolutely needs to be backed up. It needs to be put where you can restore it. But even Office 365, more and more folks are talking today about backing that data up. So you don't just leave it where it is and have the confidence of what they're going to do with it. You want to back that up. You want to archive it and make sure you're able to get to your Office 365 messages. Anything deleted will last 30 days under their base system. If you want to have it backed up longer than that, they have some of their own tools that they can use to allow you to have a longer life without losing those data bits, permanently. But still probably a good idea to look at a third party, at least consider that and see what your options are there. Sort of the next thing to consider as part of our playbook is how often you want to back up. Going back to my chiropractor, he's got 3 people on tables being worked on at a time and another 3 in the waiting room, and then pretty much a rotation all day long. So I don't know how many people he sees in a day, but it could be 30 people. If he loses a day's worth of billing, that turns into real money after a while. So for him, he's going to want to back that data up hourly, if maybe not even faster than that. If you get a handful of orders on large ticket items, you're selling construction machinery, then maybe you just back up once a day because you're going to simply have so few transactions. You can rebuild that if you needed to. But it's a good reason to think of that. If you're highly transactional, you need to have that backup taken more quickly, more often. If you're less transactional, you probably can have a wider range between backups. In either case, it's critical. And the big reason is when you receive that ransomware email and somebody in accounting clicks on it and launches that exploit into your system, you want to be able to go back far enough to retrieve a clean copy, but you don't want to have to go back so far that you lose days or weeks of billing information and sales information. So it's kind of a tight line to balance between how often to do it and what your tolerance is. And then retention policy. Again, this may be governed by HIPAA. It may be governed by one of the other compliance arms that's out there. I know NIST is a project we're working on right now, a NIST compliance for a government contractor. So that's something that you want to think about. How long do you need to keep those data sets sitting out there? Is your tolerance longer than what the requirement is? So that's going to affect the amount of storage and obviously the method. Where to put it? You know, we're all today probably, hopefully, backing up something locally and something in the cloud, but that begs the question, your confidence of your cloud vendor. If they're one of the big guys, you're probably pretty confident. You know, if they're not, does it make sense? And it even makes sense if it's at Microsoft to put that data somewhere else as well. Do you keep 2 cloud copies? The days of us making, you know, tapes and putting them in a fireproof safe in our closet are probably over. But does it make sense to send it to a second location or a, you know, colo in a data center somewhere so that we keep a couple of hard copies as well as a couple of cloud copies? Again, really up to your tolerance and preference. Certainly something to discuss as part of putting that policy and the playbook in place. And then there also is the question, do you then want to be able to run remotely from a virtual environment in the cloud? So that's something else to keep in mind. And then what's your recovery policy? You know, how are you going to restore it? Are you going to bring a hard copy of that data and put it side by side in your facility so that you have a faster connection? Can your data be brought down from the cloud because you're on a fiber connection that's crazy fast? Or if you're a little slower, what do you need to do? Do you take a new server to a facility and do that? So you do need to consider that. And we talked earlier about testing, which is a critical part of what we're doing these days. It's great to have the policy and to have the book and to have it all backed up and to brag about how safe we are. But you know, an annual or maybe even semi-annual test is going to be critical to making sure that that works for you. As we talk policy, how we want to do this, what do we want to do? You guys are probably all familiar with these terms: recovery time objective, recovery point objective, and we've touched on them a bit. A recovery time is simply how long can you go without that data? If it is something that causes you be down for 2 or 3 days or even longer, do you have the tolerance to be able to get back up and running or to run on a paper system in between? More and more, that answer is no for most companies. We're more and more dependent on technology, which is how all of us make our living, so that's a good thing to us. But it is more and more critical when you look at data recovery than it used to be in a paper environment. So how far in the future can I go before I have to have this restore done? How fast is it going to be? We talked about ways to get it done and whether you go to the data comes to you. What does that look like? How do you get it? And then how much downtime can we afford is what it boils right down to. The recovery point objective is where, as we look backward, this is the rearview mirror of what has taken place. How far back do I need to go? So assuming that it's an attack of some sort or it's ransomware, in that case, you need to determine when it came in, do some forensics work to determine when the problem started, and you want to go to the backup just prior to that. In the case of something that's weather related, you probably want to pick up your most recent backup if it's just through hurricane or tornado or fire. But it's an important question, and it's not always the same depending on what your disaster is. How much of that time in the past can I lose? Going back to my friend, the chiropractor that I keep talking about, he lost 3 months worth and probably couldn't have afforded to lose even 3 days worth, given the nature of his business and how quickly those transactions come. So the old way of doing a nightly backup loses a day from the day before to today, and probably isn't sufficient for most people. So as we talk about the RPO, it's usually talked about an hour. Some folks, it's an increment of an hour. Maybe every 15 minutes they want to do that backup. So RTO and RPO are 2 of the big parts that go into that playbook, if you want to talk about it that way, or the DR strategy. How long do you hold on to them? Again, probably determined by governance if you have a compliance issue within your industry. I know attorneys aren't governed by any sort of compliance like that, but the court will tell them you've got to keep 5 years, you've got to keep 10 years. So they probably are going to have the same kinds of issues that you would have in a medical environment, just for different reasons. Do you need to certify those? So in HIPAA, you have to make sure that if you're using cloud storage, that cloud storage is certified and passes the HIPAA guidelines. So it's different than just going out and stashing something at Dropbox. You've got to make sure that you're at one of the big 3 or something else that is approved and certified by your governance agency. What about your archive? You know, if you want to clean up and reduce the footprint of that data, you archive it off. If you want to store that in the cloud, probably don't need the same speed of access to it that you do for your transactional day-to-day data, but you want to move that off-site. Even if you want to keep a copy of it locally, I would make a copy, you know, off-site, probably a hard copy as well as a cloud copy. And so you got to be able to think about where to put that archive data. So it's great to archive it. It's great to keep the footprint small. It's great for changing the amount of money amount of data that we've got to back up and saving money and not buying the high-end, high amounts of expensive storage. But it is still important to think about where you're going to put it, what do you need to do with it. Because the smaller that footprint is on your main restore, the quicker that's going to go for you, the faster you're back to getting in business. Hardware and software is really, we think we used to start first talking about our hardware and software. Now, when it comes down to backups, it's in this presentation and in our real lives, it is one of the latter things that we discuss. You know, hardware and software almost is secondary to where you put your data and how you're going to retrieve it. But you do need to talk about, you know, what you're going to use for this backup process. Are you going to put a separate server or a storage device or a backup device in your server room? That's how we run our backup disaster recovery solutions here. What are you going to use for the backup software? There's lots of freeware out there that we can use. There's some very inexpensive programs. Some of them work pretty well. In some cases, you're getting exactly what you pay for. In most of our businesses, we probably need enterprise level backup software. Yes, it's going to cost more, but it comes with support where we're going to engage. As long as you've got a support contract, we can engage on your behalf as a liaison with that third party. That's also going to be more reliable. It's going to have reporting that comes out daily to tell you that your backup ran, that it ran properly, and that everything was effective. So you do want to make sure that you're going to have an enterprise backup software would be our recommendation. Trying to take the cheap way out may be fine, but you're not going to have that level of confidence in your backup. And certainly you're going to run into that reliability and then also support issues. The next issue to talk about when you're looking at the software to back up to your hardware is it file-based or is it image-based? And this is this old discussion we've had about are we backing up a flat file and backing up one file at a time, or is it going to be image-based in a block level environment? So probably depends on your business. Probably depends on how you're used to working. We use an image-based system, and then you want to be able to have that same software to be able to restore and to sort of repopulate or rehydrate that data as you're pulling it back down again. So I think that it's a big key. Most everything today is going to be image-based. It's what we would recommend. And the next piece we also recommend is that it be application aware. And simply by that, if you're running an ERP, it is aware that there is a database that goes along with it. Those connections are made at the data storage site, whether it's on your backup hardware, whether it's in the cloud, so that if you're running that CRM or an ERP, they're able to have that database associated with it, be able to have that relationship be known to the software, and it understand that those are files and applications that go together. In the simple question of what you're backing up to in the local sense, it is faster to do it locally. Think about it, you're doing a hardwired cable from the server to a potential storage box right next to it. It's going to make it quicker. Certainly the same thing for a restore. You may need to restore a file or a lost email, so it's not a disaster. You don't need to pull your entire backup down. You just need to go look at that local backup and grab the file that's been deleted or corrupted. So it does make sense to invest in higher quality, although they may be more expensive, systems to do that and keep it locally in addition to what you're doing offsite. The more you can do locally is the faster, the more robust it is. The better the hardware on the front side, the better and easier the process is on the back side when you try to restore that data. So you're getting lots of benefits by running that high quality software on site. And then you also want to be able to automate the process. And this is going to be done through hardware and also the software that you choose for your backup. We mentioned earlier the idea of an IT director grabbing a tape or a set of tapes and driving them to his house. And you rotate tapes once a day, so you've got 5 5 copies, you don't lose more than a day at a time. We've depending on how long people have been in the business, we've probably all done that. But today we do want to get away from the manual approach and do the more automated process if we can. We want to be able to set it up so that it runs whether we're there or not. If I'm on vacation next week, I know my backups are being done. It also will kick off a report to me each night and let me know that it was done, and we've been able to successfully back that up. So that's just another thing to consider when we're looking at how to do our hardware and our software. And that's really the last piece of the pie. We mentioned earlier that we're going to do a giveaway, and we'll have Ashley do that for us in just a moment. But what it's going to be is a backup analysis. And that means we're going to have one of our engineers come on site, take a look at your backup if it's in place, take a look if you've got your playbook or your DR strategy. We can take a look at that. Simply, count servers, look at connections. What's your backup speed? Are you doing a backup with a hard drive on site today? Are you backing up with a separate box today? Are you backing up to the cloud? So we're going to look at that 1, 2, 3 kind of approach. And then we'll be able to produce your report and tell you, hey, you're doing a great job. Don't change anything. May come back and say, wow, this disaster recovery is a disaster itself. Realistically, most folks are somewhere between the two extremes, and there are things you can do well, but we'll help you update. We'll look at the process. But we're giving away that one of those backup analysis ventures for free. So we'll have Ashley do that for us here in a moment. So with that, I want to thank you for paying attention to what I've had to say. I hope you found some of it to be useful for you. If nothing else, what I hope we've done is to kick off some questions in your mind. If you do have questions for me now, please enter them in the Q&A section here. I think we've got a couple that have come in already to Ashley, but if you want to put something in here, we'll address those. In the interim, let's go ahead and go to Ashley, if you would. I know you've got the drawing to do. Just let me know and hold up the name of who the winner is, and I'll announce that. And then after that, we can roll into questions if you'd like.
Great. Thanks, Andy. We'll go ahead and take time for questions. Just like Andy said, please type those into the Q&A box. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and draw a name. All right, and our winner is?
Winner today, Taylor Driscoll from Southern Pharmacy.
Woo!
Taylor, I will be in touch with how to get that to you, and be more than happy to look forward to coming out and doing a backup analysis and seeing what you have within your system we might be able to assist with. So Ashley, I think you had a couple questions that had come in, and if any more come in, we'll address them. If not, we'll take these two and move on.
Sure. Yep. So the first question is, how would I recover if I was hit with ransomware?
All right, we had a bit of a conversation about that earlier during the slide that referenced it, but we want to take a look, just like some of the examples we gave. We want to take a look first at when the I guess ransomware hit came in. Was it via an email? Was it via an attachment to an email? And just forensically determine when that started. So was it yesterday? Was it a week ago? Has it been sitting there dormant for 6 months? All of those are possibilities. From there, once we determine when it came in, we can go back to a backup prior to that. If it means going to tomorrow morning, if it means going to last Monday, or if we've got long-term backups and we've got to go that far back, depending on how long it's been sitting there, that is step 2. Then we want to restore from that point based on whatever you have in place with a backup, and then do that restoration so that we can move forward to sort of whatever our mitigation strategy is with a clean set of data. So that does point out you want to do hourly or incremental backups, and the less time we've got to waste going back and grabbing one of those that is clean, the less data you're going to lose. So that is sort of what the process looks like. And again, anybody wanting to have further conversations, we can do that for you.
Great. The next question is, what is the first step in creating a DR strategy?
The first step really is the analysis that we're giving away free. Taylor, I saw you had dropped off and come right back on. You actually won the giveaway that we just had on this screen, where we're going to come out and do a half-day analysis on your site. And whether you got the free one like Taylor did, or any of our other guests or people who are going to see this taped later, we could come out and do that analysis and spend about a half day to a day on your site and then putting the data together once we get back to the office. And that will tell us where you are with your backups, what you're using, where you're going, what your strategy is, what your RTO and RPO is. And so the first step in starting a process to create a backup or to verify that yours is working would simply be having a conversation with us and spending a couple hours making sure that either you're in good shape or seeing what we could do to improve it and move forward and create a new strategy. So I think
Great.
that those are the two questions that we had. Unless somebody wants to raise a hand or ask one in the Q&A section, I think that will wrap up most of what we are planning to discuss today as part of this. I do want to just say, first of all, thank you so much, everybody, for attending. We are going to put this on YouTube and probably send a copy out to attendees, even the couple that could not attend today. If you need to contact us, here's the information, info@TCS, and then obviously the website, the phone number. If you need to reach me, I think we've probably had conversations before, but if you need to reach me, it's apurcell, APURCELL @tcsusa.com. My phone number, 336, of course, 430-1573, 430-1573. And that's how to reach company and to reach me. And I will look forward to speaking with each of you as we go forward. Taylor, I'll contact you about your how to initiate or kick off the giveaway for the analysis that we're going to do. And thank you guys again for being with us. Everybody who's watching online or watching this in a recorded fashion, please feel free to give us a call and ask any questions you might have. And other than that, thank you for joining us. Have a great afternoon, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody soon.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.